So, welcome to the Way to Wow show, People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and this is our regular Wednesday broadcast. It's 12:30 or close to it here on the Pacific Coast, 3:30 p.m. on the East Coast, and the times in between. And my guest today is Dr. Mark Brouker, Captain, retired, United States Navy. Before I introduce Mark further, though, I just want to mention a couple of things. First of all, my colleague Leah Siegel's show will be broadcasting tomorrow, Thursday, 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time. And we've done a pivot on her show. So Leah's show is now called The Way to Wow Show, Bounce Back. And Leah talks to people who have met and conquered life's challenges and have some interesting lessons that we can use when we're confronted with those hurdles that inevitably come up, how to get over them and go on to bigger and better things. Leah's guest tomorrow is Jay Siegel. You may notice that they have the same last name, and that is because indeed, Jay is Leah's husband, also known as Rabbi Siegel. And Jay has a fascinating story to tell about being what he calls the recovered rabbi, going from dark to light. And he will talk about his journey of spiritual resilience. And I think you will find that quite interesting. And she always gets embarrassed when I say this when I'm on, when I'm producing her show. So I will say it right now because she's not here. Leah is a fantastic interviewer, very insightful, very empathic. And so I invite you to join us tomorrow afternoon for that broadcast. But today I have someone who, Mark's and my relationship is really an outgrowth of my transition out of the Navy into civilian life. I was looking to connect with Navy colleagues who were involved in academia, and at the time, Mark was a professor or an instructor anyway at Chapman University, I believe it was. And we got on the phone, and from the first time we talked, it was like, I think we were brothers. And soon thereafter, Mark came down to visit me when I was on duty at SEAL Team 17. And to show you what a glib talker he is, SEAL Team 17's workspaces, they have controlled access. So you need to have an ID card to get in. And he buzzed and didn't have an ID card, but they let him in anyway. So, I would say if Mark comes to visit you, I don't want to say lock up your valuables because he's not that kind of guy, but just beware that if he asks you to do something, you're probably just going to end up doing it because he's a very, very persuasive man. And he met many of my colleagues that day, and they were all just absolutely delighted to meet him. And we're going to be talking about Mark's professional journey as we do each week. And I think out of that, you will find that he has one particular subject that has been a lifelong, continues to be a lifelong learning quest. And I'm not going to, give away the secret, but I think it'll become evident pretty quickly as we go along. So, Mark, first of all, welcome to the Way to Wow show, People Making Money. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me today.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's good to see you. We've spoken on the phone many times. It was been a while since I've seen your face, so you're looking good, buddy.
Thank you. You as well. So, Mark, you obviously first off had a long and distinguished career in the Navy. So, would you talk to us a little bit? Where did this decision to join the Navy come from? Why was that your, at least initial chosen career path?
That's a great question. So, I grew up in Massachusetts, went to pharmacy school up there in Northeastern University many years ago, got a job in Washington, D.C. I just want to get out of Boston and try something new. Washington, D.C. seemed like a pretty cool place. And I had I was running a drugstore, this chain drugstore called People's Drug, just like CVS and Walgreens back then. But what happened is I didn't really like the job, but I did it for 3 years. I had some debt to pay off, like we all do. But I got held up a couple of times, literally got a gun to my head one time, another time there's some shots fired. It's a long story, but it was just a little dangerous. Washington, D.C. was a dangerous place in the 80s. And I had a good story, right? 3 blocks from the White House. But I always thought about the Navy. My father was in the Navy. I had a cousin in the Navy. So it's always kind of in the back of my mind. And I guess part of me said, if I'm going to get shot at, I'm also going to wear a uniform. So, but I took it was a pretty risky thing in '83. It was post-Vietnam, but Reagan is a big 600 ship Navy thing. So anyway, I took a risk. I think the big incentive for me was they said, we'll guarantee you a job in San Diego, California at the Naval Hospital. I always wanted to go cross country. Anyway, took the opportunity. Didn't think I was going to stay in for 30 years, but ended up just loving it. And it was a good fit for me, and I just really, really enjoyed it. And really what I loved about it was the Navy is anyone out there, and same thing, Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, they're all, they all give you great opportunity, but they gave you an opportunity to lead, which I just ended up loving to do and learned a lot from that experience. So it was a great ride.
So if I can back up a little bit, where did the decision then come to go to pharmacy school? I don't think I've ever heard anyone, as a kid say, when I grow up, I want to be, a pharmacist.
Well, well, here's the deal, man. So that's another interesting story. So in a nutshell, I'll be completely transparent here, man. My father, we grew up lower middle class. My father was a blue collar worker, General Electric plant up there in Pittsfield. It's since closed, sadly, but his father was in the same plant. His grandfather, it's a lineage of blue collar workers. Good job back then. But my father did not want me to be in that, follow his lead. So he wanted me to go to college, but he put a lot of pressure on me. He said, Mark, if we're going to send you to college, you need to come up with a profession. I had no clue really what I wanted to do, but the pressure was hot and heavy when I was 17. Literally, I was working in a drugstore at the time. And the night that he really put pressure on me, he said to me, he goes, you got to come up with a decision like quick. Well, that night I worked in the drugstore. I saw Mr. Socop. I'll never forget. He was a pharmacist, wore a nice little smock. I was just selling, Snickers and stuff. I wasn't doing any pharmacy work, but he had a nice car, and he seemed like his job was pretty chill. So I went up to him that night. I said, "How do you become a pharmacist?" He told me 5 years, hard work. I said, "Okay." So that night I went home and told my dad I want to be a pharmacist. So I put absolutely not zilch of information into thought into it, but it worked out well. It was a means to an end. And pharmacy is a great profession, but it just I like the leadership aspect of it in the Navy. So that's it. That's it in a nutshell. Not your traditional way to pick a profession, but there it is.
Well, so it's interesting because I think sometimes I don't know, we get maybe it's a gut instinct or we just see something and it seems right, and there's a value in pursuing that. And trying it out. A pharmacy obviously takes going to school and all that, so it's an investment of time. But I'm not, I've never seen any data on this, but I'm not sure these sort of in-depth searches that people make end up with them getting a profession or a job that they're any happier with. So
my bottom line is I did not want to be poor. Frankly, I didn't want to. My parents struggled with money. God bless them. But I really didn't want to be in that position. And, pharmacy seemed like a pretty decent way to get out of it. But anyways, interesting way how we pick our ways in life, isn't it?
Yeah. And I assume at the time you were not married, or?
Yeah. No, I was not married. I met my wife, Chris. We've been married 39 years coming up in next month.
Wow.
And we met in Washington, D.C. I was about a month out of college, and her and I met, and we fell in love.
And so you were married at the time you decided to go into the Navy?
Yeah, another interesting story. Yeah. So as everyone else, we pick our date, June 18th, 1983. That's the day we're going to get married and send all the invites out. About 6 months before that is when all these things happened with the holdups and the guns and whatever. And that's when I decided to join the Navy. So I was up at actually basic training for midway through my basic training is when the marriage was. So they gave me a weekend pass, flew to Minnesota, got married, went right back to Newport for finish out basic training. So she was with me the entire time for my Navy 30 years. She's been from the very beginning to the end.
And what did she think about this idea of, going from being a civilian pharmacist to, joining the Navy? And did she have any sense of, what that was going to mean, schlepping all over the world, that kind of stuff? Or?
Yeah, she had no sense whatsoever. God bless her. And she never met anybody in the Navy from Minnesota. But the thing is, she knew how I don't want to say miserable, but I just wasn't happy in my job. And as a good spouse, she knew I wasn't happy, and she knew I wanted to do something different. And I was talking to someone yesterday who's just getting out of the Navy, and the key with anything, actually, I talked to a guy who's a corporate leader yesterday who did 24 moves with corporations and was CEO of 3 different places. Just fascinating. But the point is, we both agreed our spouses really are a key to this thing. If Chris, my wife, was not on board with this Navy thing, I wouldn't have been able to do 30 years. But she made it exciting for the kids. The kids were, they were not traumatized by these moves. They thought it was an adventure because of my wife. Of course, I was thrilled to be moving. You go into a new job, but it's your spouse who really is going to make or break it. So I'm very blessed that Chris has been a big supporter of my Navy career.
And when you entered the Navy, I mean, was the plan all along to stay for 30 years,
No.
or kind of what was your sort of perspective at the time that you made the decision, and then you're going through officer training and all that?
Yeah, well, the plan was to get to California, get my pharmacy license, and get a job in California as a civilian. That was the job. That was the plan. Ended up liking the Navy, and from there they offered me to go to Subic Bay in the Philippines, and to move overseas was such an adventure for Chris and I. So we decided to do that. And that tour, that took another 3 years. That really got me excited about the Navy. And at that point, I think I realized I want to do more than just one tour, and ended up doing 30. And really, I was thinking of getting out at the 22-year mark, I guess. And that's about when 9/11 happened. And as everyone who's on the line, whether you're in the military or not, it changed a lot of people's lives. And it certainly changed my perspective. I did not want to get out of the military. I want to stay in. And so anyway, we got to 30 years.
And besides San Diego and Subic, where else were you stationed? And what was your, and as you talk about them, maybe talk about what was your career progression like? So as you mentioned that you really enjoyed the leadership aspect of being in the Navy. That's kind of your secret sauce, I think. So what was that, career progression like, and how did your, your interest in leadership, was that something, you brought to the Navy, or was that something the Navy sparked? How did that all come together?
Yeah, so what happened, I guess, with me is probably the first 10 years of my Navy career, I realized that my morale, my engagement, my excitement to go to work waxed and waned. Sometimes really fired up to go to work, other times did not like going to work. Matter of fact, there were at least 2 times in my Navy career I called up the Human Resource Department, PERS, for those people in the Navy, and I told them I want to quit. Well, naively, you just can't walk away from the Navy, but that's how miserable I was. And they said, you can't get out. And that would have been a big mistake. But I started looking into it. I said, why is my mood vacillating so wildly? And I realized, I looked into it. It had nothing to do with where I was located. I had some fun duty stations, not so fun duty stations. It had nothing to do with that. It had nothing to do with the job I had. And as any other profession, pharmacy, you've got an umbrella of jobs you have. But it had nothing to do with that. What I realized, it was my boss. Sometimes I had a boss that got me fired up to go to work, and other times I had a boss who wanted me to quit. And that really intrigued me. And I wanted to know why. I wanted to know why certain leaders did certain things that made me excited. Other ones, like I said, I want to quit. And I started reading about leadership. This is many, many years ago, probably 6, 7, 8 years into my Navy career. And it was kind of a hobby. You have an interest. I just got seriously interested in this. Back then, there wasn't no podcasts and whatnot, but there's mostly books. And I just read a lot of books. And I got some thoughts and theories on leadership. Move ahead 20 years. And in the Navy, you just take on larger and larger jobs. I took on larger and larger leadership positions in pharmacies. I got a big break, and bottom line is I got selected to be commanding officer at Naval Hospital Bremerton, which was, I remember getting that call. I was just very, very surprised and frankly thrilled. And that thrill and excitement lasted until about 3 days before I was actually going to take over the job. And I don't think I had a panic attack, but I couldn't sleep. We were driving cross country, heading to Seattle, Washington area, and I was tossing and turning, and I could not sleep. And of course, I my wife up, Chris, and she's, what's going on? She goes, I said, I'm nervous about this job. And she looked at me with, when she asked me, what are you specifically nervous about? I said, well, I'm not sure I know how to run a hospital. Here I'm going to be running a hospital in 3 days. And she looked at me with this look of horror. She said, you're telling me we're 3 days away from this thing and you don't know what you're doing? And that wasn't overly dramatic. I mean, I wasn't incompetent. I don't want to say that, but there were so many other people more qualified for that job than I was. Other people knew it. I knew it. Now my wife knew. But here's what she said to me. Chris has always been giving me wise counsel, Kevin. She said, Mark, you've been studying leadership your whole life. Go into this job and be the best leader you can be, and employ those things that you've learned. You're not going to learn how to run a hospital in 3 days, but just be the best leader you can be. And that's what I did, Kevin. I just did the things that's all written in the book about taking care of your people is really what I did. And what happened over those 3 years was really the profound experience of my life. We ended up being the most, we won more awards than any other hospital in this region. The region was big. It was the whole Pacific Rim, 12 hospitals. And that was really an amazing experience for me. It was stunning. In the fact that while I really wasn't the expert in running a hospital, I did try to connect with my people, show them I cared, and they responded incredibly well. Of course, I was surrounded by brilliant people, but that was the pivotal moment of my career. And that's when I realized that these leadership behaviors, and it really is behaviors, are so powerful. So that's my story in the Navy, and we could talk about the transition, but that's how I got into this leadership thing.
So, one of the questions that comes to mind is, you have this sort of self-professed, you didn't know what you were doing for this, very senior position, and yet the Navy chose you for it. And as in retrospect, obviously the Navy made an outstanding choice. So what is it you think that the Navy saw in you that caused them to choose you, despite what turned out to be your own kind of maybe misgivings, if you will?
Yeah, that's really, it really is such an important question. Again, talking to this gentleman yesterday about his experience, and we both concluded that the most important thing you can do as a leader is pick the right people. And I'm not saying I wasn't the best person for this job, and I know I wasn't, but what I guess somebody saw something in me that they liked. I'm guessing I wasn't behind the scenes when they made these decisions, although I know how the decisions are made. They do it with a great deal of mindfulness and discerning, because these are important jobs. So I don't know. I would guess that someone just saw some leadership traits in me that they thought would be good in this position, and they gave me a shot. And I realized how important this was. Not too many pharmacists get opportunities to run a hospital the size of Bremerton. Matter of fact, truthfully, it's never been done before. A naval pharmacist never run a family medicine teaching hospital. So I knew that I certainly didn't want to screw this up for a million reasons, but I want to make sure that other people had the same opportunity I had. So I just want to do it well. And again, what I learned, I guess the last thing I just want to say, Kevin, on this topic is, when I went into the job, I thought about the great leaders that I had worked for. I've done a lot of thinking on leadership, as you could probably imagine. You don't write a book without thinking about it. But this is before I wrote the book. I wrote a list of all the great leaders that I had worked for. And I looked at it, I said, what did they all have in common? And just what they all had in common, I felt they cared for me. And now they may not have cared for me, but I felt like they cared for me as a human being, not just a naval officer. But then I thought about, what did they do? What did they specifically do that made me conclude that they cared for me? And those are the things in the book, knowing your staff, be visible, be respectful and whatnot. And that's what I did very, very in spades in Bremerton. I tried desperately to show the people I cared for them. And I was very transparent. When I didn't know something, I told them, I don't understand what this is all about. And I think they appreciated me being, vulnerable, I guess is a good way to put it.
I mean, from my time in the Navy, my guess is, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. I think sometimes we don't perceive ourselves in the way others perceive us. And so, perhaps people saw in you these qualities of leadership and considered them perhaps more developed than you felt they were. And so, from their perspective, they weren't taking a big leap of faith. They were, pretty certain that, you would step up to the plate and, to continue the baseball metaphor, knock it out of the park.
Yeah. Well, one thing I did, again, thinking back, I had some pretty, I'd say bad jobs, but jobs that were kind of, no one wanted these jobs. I mean, look, we call them in the Navy collateral duties. Your primary job, and you got these other little, frankly, shitty jobs, as they used to call them. And I got some of those jobs that weren't really, I was an MWR, morale, welfare, and recreation guy. I was a guy who, I had 2 parties I had to put together, Christmas and the Corpsman Ball. But, I put a lot of effort into that. I picked the right people. I had fun with it. And we had the best parties in that 3 years. So I guess my what I learned from that is no matter what job they give you, just do the best you can do. And chances are, more times than not, life is not fair, but more times than not, good things will happen. And that was my experience. Every job I went into, and some I really didn't like, but I realized that, I really had to do the best I could to be, get on someone's radar. And maybe that's what happened. I did try really hard at every job I had. Even though some leaders that weren't that stellar, I just continue to try to perform at the highest level.
Well, and I think that's an excellent lesson for us to always keep in mind. It can be very dispiriting, right, to work for someone who's difficult to deal with, and it can feel like, well, he's demoralizing me. Why should I give him my all? But of course, we have a self incentive, if you will, to perform well, and I think that ties into our self-respect. It certainly ties into whether we can reasonably expect to advance professionally, et cetera. So I think that's a great lesson that perhaps comes out of your career in the Navy. Yeah. So you're 30 years in the Navy, and it's time for you to go. So talk about, if you would, when did you start the transition? How did you work on it? How was your family involved? Give us a little insight into that, if you would.
Yeah. My experience of transitioning to the Navy is everything you're not supposed to do. So it was not. One thing I tell you, Kevin, I do a lot of mentoring of folks. I guess mentoring is probably not the right. Coaching is probably the right term of transition, because transition's very, very hard. And for me, the transition from the Navy to the civilian world was really, really hard. And one of the things I got in my way was I was afraid to go up to people and say, I'm looking for a job. That was a bridge too far for me. I was too prideful, frankly. And so I do a lot of coaching now, folks, but even admirals coming out saying, hey, you just got to get out there and say, I'm looking for work. No one's going to come to you unless you just, lay it out there. So it was not a good transition. It was a hard transition, I think, for a number of reasons. I'm not going to get into it too much, but I love the Navy. I want to stay in the Navy. 30 years, all you can do is a 06 commissioned officer. I don't think I prepared enough. I don't think people, frankly, in the military, and they give you the transition classes of how to wear a tie, how to put a resume together, important stuff. But I didn't get the mental aspect of it. Is when you're moving to another realm of your life, just another season of your life. But I landed on my feet. Took me a couple of years, and I do what I love to do now. But a lot of interesting things I learned about transitioning. Now I do, like I said, I do a lot of work with folks helping them transition.
So and as you know, I've worked with military people who are transitioning as well. One of the things I've noticed, more so among senior enlisted and senior officers, is it's kind of like, you go from, your people, like snapping to attention, yes, sir, when you speak. And then, that next day you're out of the Navy and it's like, you're just a guy now, and I call it, that sort of loss of prestige. And I think even the best leaders who don't get all wrapped up in the idea of, captain, colonel, sergeant major, it's still, there's some kind of visceral thing there that I've noticed. So how does one be on guard for that? How does one conquer that sense? Because we're talking really about a major shift in identity, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
I don't know. I've not read anything or found any. Maybe someone who's listening could write a book on it, but I don't know. I've found anything that shows if you do this, this, and this, you will, especially in the military, you're going to have a smoother transition as far as the prestige thing. I think you just got to be mindful that it's going to happen, and you're just going to have to deal with it. I mean, there's no like, for instance, when I was working at this corporation, they were called. It was this one person was calling me Brouker, not Mr. Brouker, not Mark, and certainly I want to be called Captain. Those days were over, but Brouker. So I finally went up to them. I said, "Hey, let me just tell you, I was called Brouker twice in the military, and it was because I screwed up. So that's just, please don't call me Brouker. Just call me Mr. Brouker, call me Mark, call me anything you want, but just don't call me Brouker." And they got it. And I don't think that was over the top. I don't think that was beyond the realm. But I think for anybody, like a CEO leaving and maybe volunteering, you just got to be mindful that your life is going to change, and you are not going to be, not going to jump to attention when they walk in a room anymore. I don't think that wasn't the big part of my transition. I think for me, it was the purposefulness. I mean, for 30 years, I was doing something extremely meaningful, I thought. And sometimes you take these jobs that you're not going to replicate that. And Kevin, you were the SEAL teams. When I ran into you with SEAL Team 17, I had been working, and I've had to take a knee with the Honor Foundation, which is the nonprofit that helps these SEAL team members transition. Mm-hmm. And what I tell them, I say, "Hey, man, you're never going to recapture the magic of a Navy SEAL team. It's impossible. I mean, it's the highest performing team in recorded history. There's nothing like it. So don't have your expectations so high." So I think one of the things we could do as we transition, just lower your expectations. If you work for the VA, that's probably a very noble goal. Maybe equal to DOD. So, but just be mindful that you're probably not going to recapture that purposefulness that you had in the military, and just lower your expectations a little bit. It's a new chapter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you're transitioning out of the Navy. What did you mentioned you were working in a corporate setting? So what was that like to go from the Navy to getting that corporate job? And
Yeah, well, it wasn't, I got to be careful here, but it wasn't a healthy organization I went into. I was looking to make a certain amount of money, and they offered me that certain amount of money, and I just took it. and that's okay. It's the recession. There was a bit of a recession at the time, but what I guess it wasn't a perfect fit, but that's okay. What I tell people when you're transitioning, especially out of the military, don't overthink this thing. The chances of you finding your perfect job the day after you get out of the military is probably zero. I've never met anyone who has. So don't overthink it. Grab something you have a good gut feeling on. And if there's a cross between two of them, take the higher paying job, of course, but don't overthink it, because it's going to take you a while to wear the tie and figure out how this corporate thing works out. In 6, 9, 12 months, you start looking for other stuff if you need be. So I just tell them, don't overthink it. Just grab a job and start that transition in the civilian world.
Yeah, and I think that's sage advice, and I think that could easily apply to someone coming out of college.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
I don't recall exactly what the statistics are anymore, but I think it's something like almost 100% of military people leave their first post-military job, within 3 years, and it's a really high percentage that leave, within the first year. What we think a particular job is going to be, it doesn't turn out to be. And I'm reminded of a piece of advice that my friend who works at NASA lives by, and he says, just say yes, right? Yeah. Good things come when you say yes, even if it's just kind of a transitional, situation that leads you to the next, better step. So it sounds like that's kind of, what you did is, okay, I got the opportunity. I'll say yes and see how it goes. Yeah. So now you're in the corporate job. It's not really working for you. What was the next step after that?
Yeah. So at the same time, I started my own company. I mean, literally, I started this. It's a company of one. It's not a big corporation. It's a sole proprietorship. Doing business ads, Brouker Leadership Solutions, and it was pretty easy. $50, you put a thing in the, it's pretty easy to file for your own company, as most people probably know. I thought it was some huge process. It was pretty easy and cheap. Yeah. So, and I, just did some rudimentary things, bought a business card, and started doing some pro bono work, giving talks to different groups. And people liked what I had to say, and that spread pretty quickly. And so I got out of the military in 2013. I had a couple of clients. The clients kept growing, and finally in 2015, I was kind of done with the corporate thing. I was working some academia, and I just felt it was time to go on my own, which is kind of scary for me. Of course, I was blessed with the retirement, but never having a place to go to every day was a little bit different. But my business has grown enormously, and I'm just very fortunate. So what I do now, I do a lot of coaching, executive coaching, and I do a lot of speaking. Fortunately, back on the road giving live speeches. I wasn't a big fan of what we're doing right now. I'd rather be having a beer with you, Kevin, at a bar. But this is the next best thing. But giving a talk to an audience, is anyone who's done it, it's just much more fun alive. So we're getting back to that. So. I got the book out. I got another book coming out, so I'm staying busy.
So tell us about your first book. I know it's on naval leadership. I've read the book. It's excellent. And I meant to have my copy of it here so I could flash it on the screen. Right. And I forgot to grab it before we started. But maybe if you've got one behind you, you'll show us the book. But in any event, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. After the show posts on YouTube, but tell us what was the genesis of your book? What was it like, writing a book? This was your first one, as I understand, right? Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people out there that want to write a book and would be interested in hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, well, here's the book. I was actually reviewing it. Lessons from the Navy came out, Roman and Littlefield, a couple of years ago now. So, what was the genesis of the book? First of all, I think everyone's got a book in them. So I think for anybody out there, if you've got a passion, you've got to have a passion for, obviously you can't write something, spend hours and days and weeks, something you're not passionate about, but everyone's got a story. And I think, everyone's wired differently, DNA and whatnot, but people are excited about certain things. So I encourage people, I always encourage people to put it in writing, and just don't think of it as a 300-page document. Just look at every day or every week, get in a routine. I found it, and I don't have the time to work on my second project here, my second book. But in October, I'll have more time. I'm really looking forward to that because I haven't been writing now for a couple of years. So what happened with the book, Kevin, is I took a lot of notes. The other thing I probably didn't talk about too much here, but when I was watching back in 8-10 years ago, and I had this nirvana that it's my boss who's the one who's making me happy or unhappy, I started taking a lot of notes. I watched leaders and watched what they did, and I'd write them down. I know I didn't plan on writing a book back then. I just want to remember this stuff because it was so powerful to me, trying to become the best leader I could be. So all these notes I kept taking. When I retired, I kind of looked at them out and go, my goodness, I got a lot of notes here. And that really was the nidus of the book. And I broke it into 8 chapters, basically different behaviors in each chapter. Did a lot of research into data that supports the behaviors I talk about. But the book and my talks really are predominantly stories. People love stories, and I try to put some fun stuff in there, some humor, self-effacing, things that I did wrong. But people remember the stories, and the book has, while it does have facts, because you just going to have some data in there. It's not overwhelming data; just a couple of data points and studies that to show that what we're talking about actually works. So I tell a lot of stories, and I've got quite a few of them that I've written down and use them in my speeches and whatnot. It was just an amazing experience of putting on paper and to see the book. And anyone's ever written a book, when you see the product, it really is an amazing experience. And I'll just share with you, my mom and dad are still alive. A couple of years ago when the book came out, they're any day they're probably not going to make it. They're 91 and 89. They got some health issues, but I wanted to get the book to them before anybody else, because at that time and 2 years ago, they were really in bad shape. So the first book I saw was sent to them. I opened it up and shared it with them. So it was a kind of cool experience. But I do encourage people to write something that they're passionate about. Everyone's got a book.
And you obviously it's published. You said Rowman and Littlefield. So how is it that you were? What was the path to actually getting the book published?
Yeah. So I wrote the manuscript, and I started looking into getting an editor. My daughter was she was a journalism major at University of Florida. One of her roommates used to work at Rowman. I'm sorry, I can't remember one of the big five up in New York. This name slips me, but she was an editor on her own. She goes, Mark, send it to her. So I sent it to her, and she goes, what are your plans with the book? I said, I'm just going to self-publish. She goes, no, Mark, this is a good book. I think you should, pitch it to some publishing houses. And I had no idea how to do this, but she coached me how to do it. You get a literary agent, and I was fortunate to pick up a literary agent who they're the ones who really pitch it for you. So it was a 2-year process, because I could have self-published much earlier, but she convinced me to pitch it to some different houses, and Rowman and Littlefield picked me up. So it was really quite an honor. That was another big point when I got that call. I was actually in the middle of teaching a class at Chapman University. I took a break, and I checked my emails, and I got the email from Rowman and Littlefield, and I told the class, and they all were clapping for me. It's kind of cool.
Very cool. Yeah, for sure. And so now you're on to writing your second book. Would you talk about that for us?
Yeah. For whether you love World War II or history, military history, it really doesn't matter, because this guy, Admiral Nimitz, who ran the wars, you probably know, Kevin, and most of the people realize who Admiral Nimitz is. But if you don't know Admiral Nimitz, ever heard this guy's name, he ran the Pacific War in World War II for the Americans, of course. He's an amazing guy, and there's a few books written about him. Potter wrote one, Borneman wrote one. There's a few books, but not that many. And when you read into this guy, and I've got the book probably 25% done, everything I've talked about, and everything Stephen Covey talks about, everything Dale Carnegie talked about way back when, Nimitz did these things. He took care of his sailors. And how I know that now is I went on an honor flight. If anyone knows what an honor flight is, these World War II veterans, Korean War veterans, Vietnam veterans, they get all charity work. They get a flight to Washington, D.C., and they see these sites. It's pretty cool. So I took my father on one, and I got to spend a lot of time with these World War II vets. And I went up to every one of them who was in the Pacific. I said, hey, tell me what you did. And I said, tell me about Admiral Nimitz. And they all said the same thing, Kevin. Great guy, sailor. I love this guy. He took care of us. And I asked him, how many times did you meet Admiral Nimitz? I never met him. I mean, I was at E2. He was a 4-star admiral. But they all said the same thing. And in my research, and I've done a lot of research, reading letters from people, no one has a bad thing to say about this guy. He was just an amazing leader, and he acquiesced all the time to MacArthur, because General MacArthur was the other leader in the Pacific, and he was the opposite of both brilliant people. Nimitz was a humble, soft-spoken, try to keep the ball moving forward. Of course, we all know about John MacArthur. He was, again, brilliant man, but he was pretty big ego. And he was trying to steal the show in the Pacific and whatnot. Everyone kind of knows this. Again, brilliant military leader. But that's why I think Nimitz isn't really thought about, because frankly, MacArthur kind of sucked all the air out of the Pacific. So it's an amazing story of a remote workforce of 2 million people was under his command at the end of the war, 6,000 ships, if you can imagine that. And they all loved this guy, and they all worked really hard. More importantly, the mission was accomplished in an amazing time frame. So there's a lot of stories, him visiting people, getting to know his people. There's all these fascinating stories about him that I usually tell in different seminars. So that's my project. It's about his amazing leadership.
Fascinating. A couple things come to mind, and I've read, I've read about Admiral Nimitz, of course, and I've also read about Admiral Halsey, who was one of his top lieutenants. And it's interesting that so often people in senior positions seem to engender jealousy on the part of their, just immediate subordinates. And yet I think even Halsey, spoke highly of Nimitz all the time, as did, all of the other people. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie In Harm's Way. It's one of my favorite Navy movies. And I think Henry Fonda plays Admiral Nimitz in the movie. And as you're describing, Admiral Nimitz and his character, right? Who better to do that than Henry Fonda, who always played this sort of, self-effacing guy, humble, a man of the people. And indeed, that's, so much of what Admiral Nimitz was. So I'm really looking forward to reading the book.
Let me just tell you a quick story with Admiral Nimitz, man. This is usually when I give a seminar I gave a seminar at the War College a couple of years ago, right before COVID hit. And I told this story to start it out, basically saying, how did you, really the question is, how did this man create such intense loyalty over half the planet Earth? Because it was really the Pacific Rim, 60 million square miles, 2 million men, and they all felt the same way. I love this guy. How did he do it? So this story I'll tell you real quick is it was 1942, and he's working really hard. His staff, Kevin, if you believe, he had 35 people on his staff. That grew enormously over the war, but think of it, 35 is incredible. So he was busy. He knocked at the door. His aide comes in, and he says, "Sir, there's a kid off the Enterprise who wants to see you." And the aide, like I was kind of an admiral's aide at one point, all you want to do is push people away because they're busy. And Lamar said, "Sir, I'm going to send him back to the ship. You don't have to have any time to see him." Nimitz insists on seeing him. The kid comes in and he's looking at Nimitz's 4 stars. And this kid was, 22-year-old E5 off the Enterprise, a young enlisted guy, intimidated by the big boss. And he starts stammering, he can't speak. And finally, Nimitz says, "Son, what do you want to see me for? I'd love to talk with you." And he goes, "Well, sir, here's the deal. Is you're from the hill country of Texas, and I'm from the hill country of Texas. And I have a bet with all my shipmates that I could see you face to face because we're both from the hill country. So I've seen you face to face, sir. I'm out of here." So he scoots out. And Nimitz yells to him and goes, "Hold on, son, hold on. Where are you from in the hill country?" "I'm from Kerrville, sir." He goes, "I'm from Kerrville too." And they start talking about squirrel hunting in Kerrville for a second. The kid starts getting his situational awareness back and says, "I'm out of here." He says, "Sir, thanks. This has been fascinating. I'm going back to my ship." And he scoots out again. And Nimitz says, "Hold on, son, hold on. You got a big bet with all your shipmates. You got to prove to them you saw me. Let me get my command photographer. We'll take a photo." Well, I tell you, I'm at Kevin, I'm in the War College, Naval War College, a couple of years ago, going through literally 10,000 documents, primary documents for my book, and I find the photograph. So it's a true story. This kid, that John Cherry was his name, Petty Officer Cherry. Anyway, the kid goes back to the ship, and of course he collects his money. But my question to anybody, whether you're in the military or not, just think of if you had this interaction with your CEO and you go back to your people, what are you going to say about the CEO or the admiral? You're going to say he's a great guy. So my point was that, Nimitz was the busiest human being on the face of the earth at that time. The victory and defeat was in the balance. 1942 is a pivotal year, but he took 5 minutes to talk to this kid because intuitively, I guess he knew that he had to create this buzz about him or something. I don't know. It's fascinating. As a matter of fact, just real quick, I talked to his grandson, Chester Nimitz Jr. He lives in Cape Cod. I haven't visited him yet because of COVID, but we're going to meet. I talked with Mr. Nimitz. I said, "So tell me about your father. What did he read?" He goes, "Well, I'm looking at his library right here, and I'm going to pull one book down, Lee's Lieutenants, which is a book written many years ago about General Lee." And he says, "My father wrote in there, Lee took care of his people." So obviously, he is a very young officer. He realized that taking care of your people is really important. And again, back then there was really no literature on this. There's no leadership development gurus that talked about this. So I don't know. I'm fascinated with the guy because he just intuitively understood that how to get people motivated. You got to spend some time with them and show them that you care.
I mean, I didn't know this about Nimitz, but when you look at the careers, for example, of George Patton, of Dwight Eisenhower, so neither one of these men, particularly lit the world on fire academically, but when they became officers, they made the study of leadership and military science on their own, really it was a passion on their part, and they were largely self-taught in that respect, even though both had gone to the military academy. And it sounds like Nimitz did the same thing. He really immersed himself in whatever books, et cetera, there were that he could read, and became a student. And there was some intentionality there, that goes along. And this, I think, ties back to your point earlier about no matter what the job you find yourself in, do the best job you possibly can. It sounds like the corollary is, in sort of immerse yourself in learning more about your chosen profession, your chosen direction, that there will inevitably be a payoff, and somehow it'll get inside you, and like your beautiful story with Nimitz, he somehow intuitively knew, if I can connect with this young sailor, there are massive dividends to pay for, probably, I suspect with Nimitz, not for himself per se, but just for the war effort overall, that he would spread the word. Hey, SINCPAC really cares about us as individual sailors.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I mean, people listening in, when you work for someone who you believe cares for your well-being, you're going to work harder for them. And there's so much data out there. It was so exciting when I did the research for the book. There's just ubiquitous. The data is extensive, that shows that when leaders care, profits go up. When leaders care, hospitals are safer. When leaders care, wars are won faster. There's an amazing study done in Afghanistan about 15 years ago. So it's common sense. I mean, think of it, Kevin. When your teacher cared for you, you're going to work harder as a student. But somehow we've kind of, I don't want to say we lost our way. We've not focused on this enough. I think one of my theories is there's so much information out there on leadership, we forget the basics. Just take care of your people, and you will have a motivated workforce. And what I like about it is it's practical behaviors that when you do these things genuinely in your heart, you're going to have a motivated workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too that leaders these days are so overwhelmed with so many things they need to do, and I think we need to learn to just sort of push a lot of this stuff aside, or lateral it off, or whatever, so that we can focus on what you're talking about, which is, if we take care of our people,
yeah,
everything else will fall into place.
Yeah. And I tell people that Nimitz was busy, man. Nimitz was a busy guy. And Alexander the Great, going back like 2,500 years ago, when there's reports about him that he would walk around, he would show that he cared. And there's the thing I tell people, I said, yeah, I know what you're thinking, that there was no social media, there's no emails with Alexander the Great, but I tell them, the man was conquering the known civilized world. I'm sure he had some administrative duties. He had to, atone himself all kinds of ideas on whether I have the time to do them, but I'm doing a lot of coaching now, and I'm really excited to get back on the road. I had this long drive in LA. Of course, you're stuck in traffic. So I just picked some up randomly, and I listened talking about how she had an au pair, and she was trying to get this lady motivated to be the best au pair she could be. And she was told, listen, don't tell her what to do. Just tell her what you're thinking, what your end game is. And she said, I want you to make this house a home. And that's what you should do. So I get up to LA, give my talk, and this young lady comes up to me. She goes, you're probably not going to be able to answer this, but I'm hiring an au pair, and I don't know how to tell her how to do this job. And I said, amazingly, 24 hours ago, I heard this CD. I wouldn't have been able to answer this question before 24 hours ago. But I said, just make a house a home. And the young lady teared up, and she goes, "That's beautiful." I'm just relaying what I heard. I didn't come up with it. I think it is brilliant. so just be able to touch people like that in all levels. It just, that's what I love, hitting the road. I just love helping people be the best leaders they can be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mark, you have given some great lessons that we can all use. First of all, starting with sometimes just take the leap, and if it works out, terrific. And if not, just use it as a stepping stone to the next thing, right? The second thing is, no matter what situation you find yourself in, work very hard to do a great job, add value, learn what you can learn. And even if you have a terrible, boss to work for, just do it for your own benefit, for your own sake, right? And then immerse yourself in learning about what it is that you're involved with. If it develops into a passion, all the better. I don't want to forget, everybody has a book in them, right? So, just give it a shot. I know I wrote a book several years ago on kind of a step-by-step process on how someone coming out of the military can find that first post-military job. I was not fortunate enough to get a publisher. I got close a few times, but it was still a very worthwhile endeavor. I enjoyed writing the book immensely. It was a lot of work, of course. But the research was fun, and it was really great. And when I got it done, there was kind of like, wow, I wrote a no kidding book. So,
there you go.
And since then I've given, PDF copies to various people who, could benefit from it. So, So Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your story, sharing your thoughts, your wisdom. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate it. And really good to see you again. Hopefully we'll get together face to face at some point. They're not that far apart. We got to make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So, folks, thank you very much for joining us today on the Way to Wow show, People Making Money. As you know, my guest has been Mark Brouker, and he long career in the Navy, and now writing and speaking on leadership. And Mark's contact information will be in the show notes after the episode posts on YouTube. So if you would like to get in touch with Mark, talk to him about getting coaching, or maybe coming to an organization to speak, I know he would appreciate that. There'll also be links to his book. So if you want to get a copy of, show us the book again, Mark, if you don't mind.
Lessons from the Navy. So
Lessons from the Navy,
Amazon Prime, and all the big ones.
Yeah, and I have read the book. It's a really fun book to read, and the lessons are just excellent. You can immediately apply them to not just the business place, but in many, it applies to being a parent, I think, or being a little league coach, or any kind of situation where you have you have a necessity to motivate people to do something. So I highly recommend Mark's book. So before we leave, two things. One, my guest next week is Ricky Gonzalez, and I think you will be captivated by Ricky's story. He's a young man, and he is already has tremendous success under his belt. So I invite you to join in next week on Wednesday, 12:30 Pacific, 3:30 Eastern time, for the Way to Wow show, People Making Money. And I just want to wrap up by reminding all of you in my sign off that my dear friend Marie, who's up in heaven now, and I was so blessed to know her, and I was even more blessed that before she passed, she made it clear that I was her beau, but not in any weird way, because she was my mother-in-law at the time. And I just want to say, Marie, darling, you are still my belle. So thank you all very, very much for joining us and for watching, and we will see you next week.